Hello, my name is Ophi YouTube Videos. I am a feminist and a lesbian, and I make conversational commentary videos about both of those things. And even as I was going through and picking a few videos to follow up on before the end of the year, I thought about following up on the one about the It Ends With Us drama having only just begun, and I thought, no, not yet. I still would like to do a fuller Baldoni deep dive and get my finger a little more fully on what was giving me the ick about this guy before I had the amount of information I now have with which I can say I was correct. I was correct about this thing that I have been keeping an eye on since August, when I said that the hate train against Blake Lively felt like a manufactured smear campaign against her and in favor of her It Ends With Us co-star, Justin Baldoni. And that's a statement that I've always held completely separate from any, affinity for Blake Lively. It's connected neither to my like or dislike of her. I don't think Blake Lively and I would get along particularly well. I'm not even particularly fond of any of her acting projects. I'm not confident Blake Lively and I would get along very well. I don't think she would like me very much unless maybe she learned that I was one of very few people willing to take her side this summer. But my feelings about women ending up on the wrong end of one of these hate trains are not feelings that are tied to my personal feelings about the woman in question. This hate against Blake Lively felt very clearly astroturfed to me. And I personally think, again, regardless of whether or not you like Blake Lively, any astroturfed campaign against a woman that is this successful should kind of scare you a little bit. Because if they can do it to any woman, they can do it to any woman. And they will. And they do. So I'll say again, I'm not a fan of Blake Lively. Do not endorse her history of romanticization of plantation aesthetics. I think that is dumb. I think that's racist. But I don't consider defending her in this one instance to be me being a fan of her or me defending any of the things that she has done that I would not defend. I don't wait and hold up my feminism and see whether or not somebody's enough of a girl's girl for me to deploy it or not. It's just a lens I'm kind of already always looking at the world through. And it's a lens that made this hate campaign against Blake Lively really easy to spot once it got started. Yeah, I was right. This was not just a hate train against a woman, but a manufactured smear campaign. One that there are now all kinds of receipts for because Justin Baldoni's PR team got subpoenaed. Blake Lively's complaint against Wayfarer, the production studio that produced It Ends With Us, is now public. I'm reading from the New York Times. I just kind of want to make it clear that I'm reading a court document, but it's not the same thing as Alexa Nicholas leaking the drive, because I'm reading something that is public and that the victim wanted to have public. I feel like that's pretty clear, but I just like to make it obvious where I'm approaching things from, and you can find the links to my sources, as always, in the description below. Today we are mostly going to be going over the complaint itself, but I also would love to read to you from an article from the New York Times called "We Can Bury Anyone Inside a Hollywood Smear Machine." And thank you so much to Factory Femme for tagging me in this on Blue Sky because holy shit, it confirms everything. I posted it in my community tab post earlier today as of recording, probably yesterday as of when I finished this video. And we're going to read part of it today, but if anything that I have ever mentioned in a video is required reading, if you're interested in the kind of things we talk about here in the Nuance Corner, this New York Times article is. This is a wild read, and I absolutely need to talk about it, so that is what I'm going to do. It's not the Baldoni deep dive. I'm just giving an update as of late December, as of what we know now with this New York Times article and with Blake's complaint. We can do that further deep dive with Baldoni down the road because I'm sure that his PR team is ready to ramp up what they've already been doing, which means I am not going to pretend to both sides it here. I hate this guy. Every suspicion I had that he was a piece of shit seems to have been more than confirmed. Also, just a heads up, this video is going to be a lot of reading out loud. I mean, I guess since I script, all of my videos are kind of a lot of reading out loud, but this is specifically a lot of me reading out loud from sources. I'm going to cut in to commentate since that's what I'm here to do. And also just, trigger warning for sexual harassment, workplace sexual harassment specifically. And we will go through what Blake is alleging, but I do want to actually start with the New York Times article. I'm not going to read the full thing, either of this or of the complaint, but I do want to start at the beginning when I start with either of those. So we'll start with the article first. Last summer, as the release of It Ends With Us approached, Justin Baldoni, the director and a star of the film, and Jamie Heath, the lead producer, hired a crisis public relations expert. During shooting, Blake Lively, the co-star, had complained that the men had repeatedly violated physical boundaries and made sexual and other inappropriate comments to her. Their studio, Wayfarer, agreed to provide a full-time intimacy coordinator, bring in an outside producer, and put other safeguards on set. In a side letter to Ms. Lively's contract signed by Mr. Heath, the studio also agreed not to retaliate against the actress. Okay, first of all, keep that complained during shooting thing in your back pocket, because I'm sure people are going to tell you, the timing of this is suspicious. Why is she only just complaining now? And the answer to that is, she's been complaining this whole time. She just tried to do it through the appropriate venues at first, because otherwise she would have been accused of trying to tank her own movie. Featured here in this filing is plenty of proof that at the time of filming and before production was fully underway, Blake was not just uncomfortable but had already complained to Baldoni and Heath. Heath is, by the way, Baldoni's co-host on the Man Enough podcast, where they invited Drake Bell just like a matter of weeks after Quiet on set so that they could provide him with even more cover for his charge of reckless endangerment and distribution of harmful materials to a minor. Baldoni and Heath, like Alexa Nicholas, absolutely jumped on the chance to give a platform to this man as soon as they could, and I feel no less anger and frustration at them doing that on their purportedly male feminist platform as I do for Alexa Nicholas doing it in her purportedly survivor safe space collective, whatever she was calling it, grift. It's bullshit. It's bullshit from both of them. I have already distrusted this Baldoni guy and this Heath guy from association with Baldoni, and I promise I'll stop saying it so many times, but I was right. A lot of us here in the nuance corner were right. I'd actually like to go ahead and scoot over from the New York Times article into the complaints, also hosted on the New York Times, but not part of the article. On January 4th, 2024, prior to resuming filming of It Ends With Us, following guild strikes, an all-hands meeting was convened to address the hostile work environment that had nearly derailed production of the film. Attendees of the meeting included Justin Baldoni, who is the co-chairman and co-founder of Wayfarer Studios, the owner of the film, as well as the director, executive producer, and actor in the lead role of Ryle Kincaid. Jamie Heath, the chief executive officer of Wayfarer and producer of the film. Angie Giannetti, the film's representative for its distributor Sony Pictures Entertainment, Alex Sachs, a producer on the film, Todd Black, a producer on the film, and Blake Lively, who played the role of Lily Bloom in the film. Miss Lively also had the agreed-upon right to have a representative present. She chose her husband, given that the meeting was about repeated sexual harassment and other disturbing behavior by Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath. Okay, already cutting in here to say, do you remember how one of the things people were really mad at Blake Lively about was that she had her husband at the premiere of the movie with her? I'm not saying there wasn't also a marketing benefit to Ryan Reynolds and Blake Lively presenting as a power couple and trying to maybe do a Barbenheimer with It Ends With Us and the Deadpool movie. I am saying maybe she wanted emotional support because this was the premiere of a movie that she had been so sexually harassed during that they had to have an all-hands team meeting to try to stop it. As discussed in detail below, Ms. Lively was forced to address concerns about Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath's misconduct with them directly, and began doing so months before filming began. The concerns she raised were not only for herself, but for the other female cast and crew, some of whom had also spoken up. The January 4th meeting occurred only after Wayfarer had rebuffed Ms. Lively's efforts repeatedly. During the January 4th meeting, the parties discussed in detail the inappropriate conduct that Ms. Lively, her employees, and other cast and crew experienced at the hands of Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath. After the list below was reviewed and discussed in its entirety, all parties present agreed that the outlined conduct would cease. No more showing of nude videos or images of women, including producer's wife, to BL and/or her employees. No more mention of Mr. Baldoni or Mr. Heath's previous, quote, pornography addiction, end quote, or BL's lack of pornography consumption to BL or to other crew members. No more discussions to BL and/or her employees about personal experiences with sex, including as it relates to spouses or others. No more mention to BL or her employees of personal times that physical consent was not given in sexual acts, as either the abuser or the abused. No more descriptions of their own genitalia to BL. No more jokes or disparaging comments to be made to BL and or her employees about HR complaints Wayfarer has already received on set, or about, quote, missing the HR meeting, end quote. No more inquiries by Mr. Baldoni to BL's trainer without her knowledge or consent to disclose her weight. No more mention by Mr. Baldoni of him, quote, speaking to, end quote, BL's dead father. No more pressuring by Mr. Baldoni for BL to disclose her religious beliefs or unsolicited sharing of his. If BL and or her infant is exposed to COVID again, BL must be provided with immediate notice as soon as Wayfarer or any other producers become aware of such exposure without her needing to uncover days later herself. An intimacy coordinator must be present at all times when BL is on set in scenes with Mr. Baldoni. No more personal, physical touching of or sexual comments by Mr. Baldoni or Mr. Heath to be tolerated by BL and or any of her employees, as well as any female cast or crew without their express consent. No more improvising of kissing. All intimate touch must be choreographed in advance with BL and an intimacy coordinator. No biting or sucking of lip without BL consent. And all intimate on-camera touches and conversations must be in character, not spoken from Mr. Baldoni to BL personally. BL to have a representative on set at all times and with a monitor during scenes involving nudity, sexual activity, or violence with Mr. Baldoni. All actors participating with BL in intimate scenes involving her being in any state of nudity or simulated nudity must be classified as active working actors, not friends of the director or producer, and must be pre-approved by BL. No more filming of any BL nudity without a fully executed SAG-compliant nudity rider in place. Any such footage already shot without this rider in place and in direct violation of SAG requirements may not be used without BL's and her legal representative's prior written consent. Any scene by BL or another performer depicting the character of Lily that involves nudity or simulated sex must be conducted strictly in accordance with the above-referenced nudity rider and must adhere to the BL-approved script. An intimacy coordinator must be on set for all scenes involving nudity and or simulated sex and must have a monitor to ensure compliance. No monitors to be viewed or accessible on set or remotely during closed set scenes except by BL-approved essential crew and personnel. No more entering, attempting to enter, interrupting, pressuring, or asking BL to enter her trailer or the makeup trailer by Mr. Heath or Mr. Baldoni while she is nude for any reason. No more private multi-hour meetings in BL's trailer with Mr. Baldoni crying with no outside BL-appointed representative to monitor. No more pressing by Mr. Baldoni to sage any of BL's employees. Producer Alex Sachs to be given standard rights, inclusions, and authority per her job description and as represented to BL when signing on. Sony must have an active daily role in overseeing physical production for the remainder of the film to monitor safety for cast and crew, schedule, logistics, problem solving, and creative. Engagement of an experienced producer to supervise the safety of the cast and crew, schedule, logistics, problem solving, and creative for the remainder of the shoot. And then there's some examples of names. Engagement of a BL-approved A-list stunt double to perform Lily in scenes with Mr. Baldoni involving rape and or violence. BL to perform only close-up work or work from a BL-approved shot list in scenes with Mr. Baldoni involving sexual violence. No more adding of sex scenes, oral sex, or on-camera climaxing by BL outside the scope of the script BL approved when signing on to the project. No more asking or pressuring BL to cross physical picket lines. No more retaliatory or abusive behavior to BL for raising concerns or requesting safeguards. An in-person meeting before production resumes with Mr. Baldoni, Mr. Heath, Ms. Sachs, the Sony representatives, the new producer, BL, and BL spouse Brian Reynolds to confirm and approve a plan for implementation of the above that will be adhered to for the emotional and physical safety of BL, her employees, and all the cast and crew moving forward. I had to zoom in extremely far to read that. This meeting was an essential step in a process the parties had agreed to several months before to allow the cast and crew to safely resume production of the film. In mid-November 2023, the parties had agreed in writing to implement a list of protections enumerated in a contract entitled Protections for return to productions, attached hereto as Exhibit A, which included 17 provisions designed to require a wayfarer to cease the on-set behavior of Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath. One of those provisions required an all-hands meeting to confirm and approve a plan for the implementation of certain protections that will be adhered to for the physical and emotional safety of Miss Lively, her employees, and all cast and crew moving forward. Exhibit A. After receiving the document, Wayfarer responded that Wayfarer, Sony, and production respectfully acknowledge that Miss Lively has concerns regarding safety, professionalism, and workplace culture. Although our perspectives differ in many aspects, ensuring a safe environment for all is paramount, irrespective of differing viewpoints. Regarding your outlined requests, we find most of them not only reasonable, but also essential for the benefit of all parties involved. And then I actually do want to jump right over to Exhibit A, since that is also included in this document. Protections for return to production. In order for Blake Lively, BL, to be able to return to production on the film, each of the following protections must be agreed to in writing and met without fail going forward. 1. An intimacy coordinator must be present at all times when BL is on set. 2. There must be a closed set during the rehearsal or filming of any scene involving simulated sex or nudity, and any observation via remote monitors shall be restricted to essential personnel as approved by BL, to be further described in a fully negotiated, fully executed, SAG-compliant nudity rider. 3. There is to be no spontaneous improvising of any scenes involving physical touching, simulated sex, or nudity. Scenes involving kissing, depictions of sexual intercourse, or any other physical touching must be contained in the screenplay as approved by Blake Lively, choreographed in advance in the presence of the intimacy coordinator, and may only proceed as choreographed with the consent of all participants in advance. 4. Physical touching and or comments on BL's physical appearance must only be done/made in connection with the character and scene work, not as to BL personally. Except as written into the screenplay or as strictly required in connection with makeup or costume preparation, there is to be no physical touching, including hugging of Blake Lively, her on-set personnel, and or her employees. 5. There are to be no discussions of personal experiences with sex or nudity, including as it relates to conduct with spouses or others. 6. No one will enter, attempt to enter, interrupt, pressure, or request entrance to Blake Lively's trailer while she is in a state of undress for any reason. 7. There shall be no rehearsal or filming of any nudity and or simulated sex without the nudity writer in place. 8. Blake Lively may have a representative of her choosing present with her on set for the remainder of the rehearsal and shooting days, including while on a closed set. 9. If Blake Lively is exposed to COVID-19, she must be provided notice as soon as possible after Wayfarer or any producer or production executive becomes aware of such exposure. 10. There shall be no retaliation of any kind against BL for raising concerns about the conduct described in this letter or for these requirements. Any changes in attitude, sarcasm, marginalization, or other negative behavior, either on set or otherwise, including during publicity and promotional work, as a result of those requests, is retaliatory and unacceptable and will be met with immediate action. 11. Sony must have a mutually approved representative on set for the remainder of the rehearsal and shooting days, including on a closed set, to actively supervise the production, including monitoring the safety of the cast and crew, ensuring compliance with the schedule, and overseeing logistics, problem-solving, and creative issues. 12. Wayfarer will engage an additional experienced A-level producer, approved by Ms. Lively, to actively supervise the production, including monitoring the safety of the cast and crew, ensuring compliance with the schedule, and overseeing logistics, problem-solving, and creative issues. 13. Wayfarer must empower any existing third-party producer with appropriate and customary authority to actively supervise the production, including monitoring the safety of the cast and crew, ensuring compliance with the schedule, and overseeing logistics, problem-solving, and creative issues. 14. Wayfarer will engage an A-list stunt double approved by Miss Lively to rehearse and perform any scenes involving the character Lily that depicts rape or any act of sexual violence. Ms. Lively will only perform close-up work or other pre-approved shots for such scenes. 15. Any rehearsal or shooting involving Ms. Lively or any other performer depicting the character of Lily that involves nudity, including partial nudity or simulated sex, must be conducted strictly in accordance with the nudity writer and must adhere to the approved script. 16. Any and all day players must be engaged through customary industry talent agencies and not through personal connections of the director and or producer. 17. Hold an all-hands in-person meeting before production resumes, which will include the director, all producers, the Sony representative, the newly engaged third-party producer, BL, and BL's designated representatives to confirm and approve a plan for implementation of the above that will be adhered to for the physical and emotional safety of BL, her employees, and all the cast and crew moving forward. So those are the requirements that were apparently agreed upon on the meeting, and jumping back into the complaints here. At the end of the January 4th meeting, having discussed at length the details of concerns that had been expressed by Ms. Lively and others, the parties agreed to implement and follow the protections for return to production to ensure the film could be completed, marketed, and released safely and successfully. And it was. Production of the film resumed on January 5th and concluded on February 9th, 2024. The film has been a resounding success. Leading up to and in connection with the release of the film during the summer of 2024, Ms. Lively and fellow cast members promoted the film in accordance with the marketing plan created and delivered by the film's distributor, Sony, which is summarized in the talking points attached hereto as Exhibit C. Ms. Lively and other cast members were under a contractual obligation to render promotional services in accordance with the marketing plan. The marketing plan directed the cast to focus more on Lily's strength and resilience, as opposed to describing the film as a story about domestic violence, and to avoid talking about this film that makes it feel sad or heavy. It's a story of hope. See Exhibit C. And I'm not reading the entire promotional guideline that is attached for Exhibit C, but we are going to jump over into Exhibit C. And under what to avoid in that marketing plan, it says, focus more on Lily's strength and resilience as opposed to describing the film as a story about domestic violence. Empowerment is not just about standing up to adversity, but also about having the power to overcome within oneself and grow from it, and developing agency to shape the future. Avoid describing the film as a love story or love triangle. It's the story of Lily learning how to take agency of her future. Avoid talking about this film that makes it feel sad or heavy. It's a story of hope. That was all she was given. She was not told. She was like, not only was she not told that she had to be a perfect representative for domestic violence, she was explicitly told not to talk about it unless she was asked to. And then everybody crucified her for not spending all of the press time talking about it on a set where it seems like she had been sexually harassed. I feel like I'm going crazy, and yet also I feel so justified in everything that I was saying 4 months ago. I'm sorry, I'm trying to just read and not get upset because I want to talk about it later, and I'm reading this before I have scripted, but like, oh my god, dude. So back to the complaint here from that Exhibit C. In the days leading up to the film's release, Mr. Baldoni abruptly pivoted away from the film's marketing plan and the types of publicity activities in which he had previously participated. What the public did not know was that Mr. Baldoni and his team did so in an effort to explain why many of the film's cast and crew had unfollowed Mr. Baldoni on social media and were not appearing with him in public. To that end, he and his team used domestic violence, quote, survivor content, end quote, to protect his public image, as described further in detail below. What the public also did not know was that this was the beginning of a multi-tiered plan that Mr. Baldoni and his team described as, quote, social manipulation, end quote, designed to, quote, destroy, end quote, Ms. Lively's reputation. This plan was backed by virtually unlimited resources. Wayfounder's co-founder, co-chairman, and leading financier is multi-billionaire Steve Sarowitz, who divulged at the film's New York premiere on August 6, 2024, that he was prepared to spend $100 million to ruin the lives of Ms. Lively and her family. With that backing, Mr. Baldoni and his Wayfarer associates embarked on a sophisticated press and digital plan in retaliation for Ms. Lively exercising her legally protected right to speak up about their misconduct on the set, with the additional objective of intimidating her and anyone else from revealing in public what actually occurred. On July 31st, 2024, following the recommendation of their publicist Jennifer Abel, Wayfarer and Mr. Baldoni retained a crisis communication specialist named Melissa Nathan and her company, the Agency Group PR LLC, TAG. Ms. Nathan delivered a proposal to Mr. Baldoni, which included, quote, a website, parentheses to discuss, end parentheses, full Reddit, full social account takedowns, full social crisis team on hand for anything, engage with audiences in the right way, start threads of theories, parentheses discuss, end parentheses. This is the way to be fully 100% protected, end quote. Ms. Nathan also proposed the, quote, creation of social fan engagement to go back and forth with any negative accounts, helping to change narrative and stay on track, end quote. Per Ms. Nathan, quote, all of this will be most importantly untraceable, end quote. As Ms. Abel described it, the plan was to engage in, quote, social media mitigation and proactive fan posting to counter the negative, end quote, as well as, quote, social manipulation, end quote. This plan went well beyond standard crisis PR. What Ms. Nathan proposed included a practice known as astroturfing, which has been defined as the practice of publishing opinions or comments on the internet, in the media, etc., that appear to come from ordinary members of the public, but that actually come from a particular company or political group. On August 2nd, 2024, TAG circulated a scenario planning document to Mr. Baldoni, Mr. Heath, and others, which described preparations and strategy, quote, should Miss Lively and her team make her grievances public, end quote, the scenario planning document, and is attached hereto as Exhibit D. To get ahead of this narrative, Miss Nathan's plan proposed strategies to advance misleading counter-narratives, including pushing Nathan's narrative that Miss Lively had, quote, less than favorable reputation, end quote, proposing to, quote, explore planting stories about the weaponization of feminism, ... end quote, and misleadingly blaming Ms. Lively for production members' job losses. See Exhibit D at 2 and 3. I'm actually going to wait on Exhibit D because I want to talk about that planning document as its whole own thing, and I want to continue with this complaint for a bit. Initially, Mr. Baldoni expressed concerns that TAG's action plan was insufficiently written to protect him. Writing to Miss Heath and Miss Abel, he said he was, quote, not in love with the document they sent, not sure I'm feeling the protection I felt on the call, end quote, with Miss Nathan and her colleagues. In response, Mr. Heath attempted to reassure Mr. Baldoni that they had found the right people for his campaign. In Mr. Heath's words, the most important part of this is how quickly they can shut things down and plant stories in your favor. Later that day, Ms. Abel and Miss Nathan exchanged the following text messages expressing that Mr. Baldoni wants to feel like Ms. Lively can be buried. Ms. Abel and Ms. Nathan agreed that, of course, they would do just that, but could not say so in writing. Quote, we can't write it down to him. We can't write, we will destroy her, end quote. Imagine if a document saying all the things he wants ends up in the wrong hands, end quote. Ms. Nathan followed this by assuring Ms. Abel, you know we can bury anyone, but I can't write that to him. A few days later, on August 5th, 2024, Mr. Baldoni set the narrative for the social media campaign, sending Ms. Abel a screenshot of a thread on X that had accused another female celebrity of bullying women. Mr. Baldoni stated, this is what we would need. Ms. Abel responded that she had just spoken to Melissa about this, about what we discussed last night for social and digital. Ms. Abel added, focus on Reddit, TikTok, Instagram, with reassurances that Ms. Lively would be destroyed and buried. Wayfarer and Mr. Baldoni directed Ms. Nathan and her team to actively engage in their retaliatory social manipulation campaign. Oh, and if you're curious which celebrity he was shopping around for when he was looking for women that people hate, like, you know, like a good little feminist. That's what male feminists do all the time, I guess, apparently. It was Hailey Bieber, who gets, like, shit for being a bully, and he said that they need something like that. He was screenshotting a hate post about Hailey Bieber. Again, Hailey Bieber is not a woman who I really have any affinity for, but I do think it's telling that this guy who makes so much bank, so much social clout off of what a feminist he is, he went and he hired the Johnny Depp PR firm, and then he's saying, can you destroy, can you bury, and also, can you give me the Hailey Bieber special too? I do understand there was a desire for nuance, especially because this same PR firm represented the family of George Floyd. But the thing is that it's not just that it was this PR firm, it's that the tactics that they were using were very clearly recognizable, and they're even more recognizable now that we can see these behind-the-scene messages about them. Like Justin Baldoni shopping around for hated women so that he could say, we need something like this. In the weeks and months that followed, with the direction and approval of Wayfarer and Mr. Baldoni, the team engaged in a sophisticated, coordinated, and well-financed retaliation plan. The retaliation campaign relied on more than just publicists and crisis managers spinning stories. They also retained subcontractors, including a Texas-based contractor named Jed Wallace, who weaponized a digital army around the world from New York to Los Angeles to create, seed, and promote content that appeared to be authentic on social media platforms and internet chat forums. The Baldoni Wayfarer team would then feed pieces of this manufactured content to unwitting reporters, making content go viral in order to influence public opinion and thereby cause an organic pile-on. To safeguard against the risk of Miss Lively ever revealing the truth about Mr. Baldoni, the Baldoni Wayfarer team created, planted, amplified, and boosted content designed to eviscerate Miss Lively's credibility. They engaged in the same techniques to bolster Mr. Baldoni's credibility and suppress any negative content about him. On August 10th, the day after release of the film, Ms. Nathan's team reported that they had started to see shift on social, largely due to Jed and his team's efforts to shift the narrative against Ms. Lively. That same day, Ms. Nathan noted that as part of this shift, the majority of socials are so pro-Justin, and I don't even agree with half of them, lol. Ms. Nathan then bragged to Mr. Abel that Mr. Baldoni, quote, doesn't realize how lucky he is right now, end quote, by which they were referring to their successful efforts to shut down stories that would have revealed how Mr. Baldoni's behavior, including, quote, sexual connotations, end quote, on set had made cast and crew beyond Miss Lively uncomfortable. Less than 1 week later, they again bragged about how they had shut down stories regarding HR complaints on set. On August 5th, 2024, Melissa Nathan remarked that, quote, this went so well, it was genius. On August 16th, Ms. Nathan circulated a Daily Mail article entitled String of Hard-to-Watch Videos That Have Surfaced Following Tone-Deaf Q&A to Promote It Ends With Us Could Tarnish 36-year-old star's golden Hollywood image for good. To which Miss Abel responded, wow, you really outdid yourself with this piece. And Miss Nathan replied, that's why you hired me, right? I'm the best. As their own words reveal, the purpose of this social manipulation plan was twofold. It aimed to both conceal the pattern of harassment and other misconduct by Mr. Baldoni, Mr. Heath, and Wayfarer, and retaliate against Miss Lively by battering her image, harming her businesses, and causing her and her family severe emotional harm. Millions of people, including many reporters and influencers, who saw these planted stories, social media posts, and other online content had no idea they were unwitting consumers of a crisis PR, astroturfing, and digital retaliation campaign created and funded by Mr. Baldoni and Wayfarer to hurt Ms. Lively. That is precisely the goal of an astroturfing campaign, to light the fire and continue to stoke conversations secretly, blurring the line between authentic and manufactured content and creating viral public takedowns. As laid out in this complaint, the Baldoni Wayfarer-led public attack of Ms. Lively was the intended result of a carefully crafted, coordinated, and resourceful retaliatory scheme to silence her and others from speaking out against the hostile environment that Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath created. As such, it was not only unconscionable and a breach of contract, but also illegal under both state and federal law. So the New York Times article explains, the complaint filed with the California Civil Rights Department is a precursor to a lawsuit. In a statement, Ms. Lively said, I hope that my legal action helps pull back the curtain on these sinister retaliatory tactics to harm people who speak up about misconduct and helps protect others who may be targeted. She also denied that she or any of her representatives planted or spread negative information about Mr. Baldoni or Wayfarer. I am filming this in pieces as I continue to go through the rest of the complaint. It is very long. This video is already like half an hour long, so I do want to summarize at least part of the complaint so that it's not a very, very, very long video that's just me reading. Also, if you haven't already noticed this somehow, I'm not a lawyer and I'm not pretending to be. I'm reading this because it's public and I have access to the internet and opinions. And also because I suspect that a lot of the people who are going to want to talk about this on YouTube are not people with particularly feminist opinions. So I wanted there to be a space to discuss this where we don't hate women. I do want to talk about what's in here though, even though I don't want to read it all verbatim. After that introduction that we just read, it moves into the factual background, and it lays out essentially that in 2020, Baldoni started Wayfarer Production Studios with his friends, Heath and Sarowitz. It also points out that Baldoni and Heath work together on many projects, including the Man Enough podcast, and that they position Wayfarer as a male feminist platform that, quote, explores gender roles, dismantles toxic masculinity, and creates a safer and judgment-free society for women. From scrolling down to see the exhibits earlier, I do know that a lot of the pages of this long complaint are dedicated to essentially proving that Baldoni is presenting himself as this male feminist, and I already know I will not be reading all of that out loud. Obviously, Blake and her legal team had to lay all of this out because it's like court. This, however, is my YouTube channel and not court. The complaint details Baldoni's role in the production. Mr. Baldoni serves not only as the co-founder and co-chairman of the studio that financed and ran production on It Ends With Us, he also served as director, executive producer, and co-lead actor, playing the role of Ryle Kincaid. As studio head and director, all actors, crew, and staff on the film, including Ms. Lively, answered to Baldoni. In his words, he was, quote, the leader, end quote, who sat, quote, at the top of this totem pole, ... end quote. While Sony was the distributor releasing the film, Wayfarer was responsible for the production, and Wayfarer was led by Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath. And now, in the complaint, we begin getting into what happened prior to that all-hands meeting that they needed to have to try to change the culture on set. The movie began filming in May of 2023 and then went on pause in June of that same year because of the Writers Guild strike. It sounds like most of what happened in the complaint happened in the period before that meeting that Blake had. A lot of this is so bad, I'm just going to read it. I'm not going to summarize it. So it says that about the filming beginning just for a little bit and then pausing because of the strike. And the complaint reads, during that time, Ms. Lively and other cast and crew experienced invasive, unwelcome, unprofessional, and sexually inappropriate behavior by Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath. Because Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath held all leadership positions on the production, they answered to no one and brushed off or ignored the concerns Ms. Lively and others expressed. Mr. Baldoni ignored well-established industry protocols in filming intimate scenes and exploited the lack of controls on set to behave inappropriately. Wayfarer failed to adhere to guild rules, as well as Ms. Lively's contract and standard industry safety protocols with respect to nudity and intimate scenes, which the Screen Actors Guild and the American Federation of Television and Radio Artists, SAG-AFTRA, acknowledges place performers in uniquely vulnerable situations. Such safeguards ignored by Wayfarer include providing performers with appropriate notice of nudity and simulated sex and ensuring that consent is given free of pressure or coercion. Signed nudity riders are in place, spelling out the parameters of nudity or simulated sex scenes. Safe and secure working conditions that are not detrimental to a performer's health, safety, morals, and career. And the use of intimacy coordinators to observe intimate scenes. Without these protections in place, Mr. Baldoni improvised physical intimacy that had not been rehearsed, choreographed, or discussed with Ms. Lively, with no intimacy coordinator involved. For instance, Mr. Baldoni discreetly bit and sucked on Ms. Lively's lower lip during a scene in which he improvised numerous kisses on each take. Mr. Baldoni insisted on shooting the full scene over and over again, well beyond what would have been required on an ordinary set, and without advanced notice or consent. On another occasion, Mr. Baldoni and Ms. Lively were filming a slow dance scene for a montage in which no sound was recorded. Mr. Baldoni chose to let the camera roll and have them perform the scene, but did not act in character as Ryle. Instead, he spoke to Ms. Lively out of character as himself. At one point, he leaned forward and slowly dragged his lips from her ear down her neck as he said, "It smells so good." None of this was remotely in character or based on any dialogue in the script, and nothing needed to be said because, again, there was no sound. Mr. Baldoni was caressing Miss Lively with his mouth in a way that had nothing to do with their roles. When Ms. Lively later objected to this behavior, Mr. Baldoni's response was, "I'm not even attracted to you." Mr. Baldoni inserted improvised gratuitous sexual content and/or scenes involving nudity into the film, including for an underage character, in highly unsettling ways. After Ms. Lively signed on to the movie based on a draft of the script, Mr. Baldoni, without Ms. Lively's knowledge or consent, personally added graphic content, including a scene in which Ms. Lively was to orgasm on camera. When Ms. Lively objected to these additions, Mr. Baldoni insisted he had added them because he was making the film, quote, through the female gaze, end quote. Although he agreed to remove the scenes, he made a last-ditch attempt to keep one in which the couple orgasmed together on their wedding night, which he said was important to him because he and his partner climaxed simultaneously during intercourse. Mr. Baldoni then intrusively asked Miss Lively whether she and her husband climaxed simultaneously during intercourse, which Miss Lively found invasive and refused to discuss. On the day of shooting the scene in which Miss Lively's character gives birth, Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath suddenly pressured Miss Lively to simulate full nudity, despite no mention of nudity for this scene in the script, her contract, or in previous creative discussions. Mr. Baldoni insisted to Miss Lively that women give birth naked and that his wife had, quote, ripped her clothes off, end quote, during labor. He claimed it was, quote, not normal, end quote, for women to remain in their hospital gowns while giving birth. Ms. Lively disagreed, but felt forced into a compromise that she would be naked from below the chest down. When the birth scene was filmed, the set was chaotic, crowded, and utterly lacking in standard industry protections for filming nude scenes, such as choreographing the scene with an intimacy coordinator, having a signed nudity writer, or simply turning off the monitors so the scene was not broadcast to all crew on set and on their personal phones and iPad. Mr. Heath and Mr. Baldoni also failed to close the set, allowing non-essential crew to pass through while Ms. Lively was mostly nude with her legs spread wide in stirrups and only a small piece of fabric covering her genitalia. Among the non-essential persons present that day was Wayfarer co-chairman Mr. Sarowitz, who flew in for one of his few set visits. Ms. Lively was not provided with anything to cover herself with between takes until after she had made multiple requests. Ms. Lively became even more alarmed when Mr. Baldoni introduced his, quote, best friend, end quote, to play the role of the OBGYN, when ordinarily a small role of this nature would be filled by a local actor. Ms. Lively felt that the selection of Mr. Baldoni's friend for this intimate role, in which the actor's face and hands were in close proximity to her nearly nude genitalia for a birth scene, was invasive and humiliating. To add insult to injury, Mr. Heath approached Miss Lively and her assistant on set and started playing a video of a fully nude woman with her legs spread apart. Miss Lively thought he was showing her pornography and stopped him. Mr. Heath explained that the video was his wife giving birth. Miss Lively was alarmed and asked Mr. Heath if his wife knew he was sharing the video, to which he replied, "She isn't weird about this stuff," as if Miss Lively was weird for not welcoming it. Ms. Lively and her assistant excused themselves, stunned that Mr. Heath had shown them a nude video. Mr. Baldoni added a detailed scene to the film in which the underage version of Ms. Lively's character, Lily, loses her virginity. In both the book and the script for the film, there was no sex scene. Instead, the details about this moment were left to the audience's imagination. But Mr. Baldoni added in considerable details, including both dialogue between young Lily and her boyfriend Atlas about the loss of her virginity, as well as a simulated sex scene in which Mr. Baldoni filmed and included in his initial cut of the film a close-up of young Lily's face, accompanied by an audible gasp at the moment of penetration. Ms. Lively was informed that when this scene was shot, after Mr. Baldoni called cut, he walked over to the actors and said, "I know I'm not supposed to say this, but that was hot. And did you two practice this before?" This makes me feel sick. And also explains all of those things that she wanted agreed to about not adding anything to the younger version of her character, right? I fucking hate this guy. And the thing is, I thought from the beginning the way that he kept talking about the female gaze was striking me as so goddamn creepy in this movie about domestic violence. But people were telling me I was wrong. People were telling me that because he has carefully built this branding, I shouldn't question it. I'm questioning it, baby. We also get more details about the allegations in the complaint that Baldoni and Heath were speaking about their previous pornography addiction to Blake Lively, including a mention that Blake at one point, to try to get Baldoni to stop talking to her about this, said that she had never seen it, which he later brought up in front of other cast and crew, and she felt humiliated by. There's quite a bit more of Baldoni and Heath talking about their sex lives, their relationships with their wives. We could have inferred all of that, again, in the list of things from that meeting. But we get this, too, which I would call the Drake Bell special, I think. During a car ride with Miss Lively, her assistant and driver, Mr. Baldoni claimed to Miss Lively that he had been sexually abused by a former girlfriend, which he has since shared publicly. At the end of this story, Mr. Baldoni shared that it had caused him to re-examine his past. He then said, "Did I always ask for consent? No. Did I always listen when they said no? No." Mr. Baldoni claimed this was an example of how we all have things from which we can learn and grow. Miss Lively was unsettled by Mr. Baldoni's suggestion that he had engaged in sexual conduct without consent. When Miss Lively exited the car, her driver immediately remarked that he did not want Miss Lively to be alone with Mr. Baldoni going forward. I hate this guy. I hate this guy. I really fucking hate this guy. Here's the thing. If he didn't want me to believe this when somebody said it about him, maybe he shouldn't have given Drake Bell a bunch of cover for that exact same thing. Because he sells that on his podcast, so I do believe that he would try it for himself. And we get more information, too, about him claiming to speak to her dead father. This is your reward for sticking in through all of the reading, is all of the stuff at the beginning that you were curious about. Now we're getting answers. We're figuring out the answers together. So, okay, about speaking to her dead father. Mr. Baldoni engaged in other behaviors that were shocking and emotionally distressing. For example, he claimed he could speak to the dead and on several occasions told her that he had spoken to her dead father. It was off-putting and violative for Mr. Baldoni to claim a personal relationship with her recently deceased father. Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath were also constantly hugging and touching cast and crew. When Ms. Lively or others avoided this touching, Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath would retaliate by becoming irritated, cold, and uncollaborative. The result was an unwelcoming and mercurial environment for Ms. Lively, her employees, and others on set. And yeah, I mean, even beyond what we've already talked about, it sounds like that was not a great set to be a woman on. Even, maybe especially, considering all of Baldoni's press about how good he is at being a feminist. Mr. Baldoni objectified Ms. Lively and other women by commenting on or criticizing their bodies as sex objects. Mr. Baldoni often referred to women in the workplace as sexy. When they expressed discomfort, Mr. Baldoni would deflect or try to pass it off, which undermined Ms. Lively and others' concerns. For example, on one occasion that Ms. Lively observed, he told a female cast member that her leather pants looked sexy when she arrived to the set. When she rebuffed his comment because she was uncomfortable, rather than apologizing, he brushed it off with, "I can say that because my wife is here today." Ms. Lively felt embarrassed witnessing this kind of commentary, as did others. On another day, Ms. Lively wore a low-cut dress to facilitate breastfeeding, but had it covered up with a coat. When the jacket briefly popped open at one point to reveal the dress, Mr. Baldoni commented about how much he liked her outfit, which flustered Ms. Lively. Later that day, Mr. Baldoni pressured Ms. Lively, who was in her pre-approved wardrobe, to remove her coat in front of the crew and multiple actors in a packed bar. He said he wanted to see her onesie under the coat because it was zipped low to reveal her lace bra. Consistent with past practice, he said, "I think you look sexy," in a tone that made her feel ogled and exposed. With other female cast present, she said, "That's not what I'm going for." He bristled and replied, "I'm sorry, hot." Deeply uncomfortable, Ms. Lively said, "Not that either." Mr. Baldoni responded sarcastically, "I guess I missed the HR meeting," and walked away. Another woman on the production spoke to Ms. Lively afterwards to offer empathy and to share her own similar experiences, with Mr. Baldoni commenting about her in sexual terms. As a result of Mr. Baldoni's behavior, on May 29, 2023, another cast member lodged a sexual harassment complaint against Mr. Baldoni's gross and unwanted comments towards her and others. While on the one hand, Mr. Baldoni was objectifying Ms. Lively as a sex object, on the other hand, he went out of his way to message criticisms of her age and weight, neither of which she could change during filming. On the second day of filming, for example, Mr. Baldoni made the rest of the cast and crew wait for hours while he cried in Ms. Lively's dressing room, claiming social media commentators were saying that Ms. Lively looked old and unattractive based on paparazzi photos from the set. She tried to reassure him that she should look authentic in the scenes depicted in the photos, which were just after her character had been abused by her fictional husband, rather than hot. Mr. Baldoni, however, appeared focused on Ms. Lively's sexual appeal above all else. His lengthy outburst caused a delay in shooting, forcing an emotional scene to be shot haphazardly. To make matters worse, when Ms. Lively tried to have a meeting with Mr. Heath and the other producers to discuss Mr. Baldoni's unprofessional behavior described above, that meeting turned into yet another violation. Rather than an ordinary meeting time and place, Mr. Heath arrived unannounced at Ms. Lively's hair and makeup trailer while she was topless and having body makeup removed by makeup artists. Ms. Lively told Mr. Heath that she was almost done and they could meet once she was closed. Mr. Heath, however, insisted that if she didn't allow him into her trailer to speak to him at that moment, then there would be no meeting with the other producers. Ms. Lively reluctantly agreed, but asked that Mr. Heath keep his back turned. A few minutes into the conversation, Ms. Lively noticed that Mr. Heath was staring directly at her while she was topless. When she called him out, Mr. Heath brushed it off as a habit of wanting to look at a person while speaking to them. Ms. Lively and her hair and makeup artist were all deeply disturbed by this interaction on just the second day of filming. Okay, so they also barged into her trailer a lot while she was breastfeeding. She apparently was not given breaks to breastfeed. There's something that we had already heard about when the initial press was coming out about this, when the movie came out this summer, when Baldoni had contacted Blake's trainer. shortly after she had given birth to her 4th child, and said that he wanted to know how quickly she could lose the baby weight because he was concerned about having to pick her up with his back injury. She says in this that there was no such scene in the movie. This is also just really, really bad, so I'm going to read it directly. Not that everything else isn't also really bad, but just, oh my gosh. When Ms. Lively caught strep throat, Mr. Baldoni offered as a gift to connect her with an expert he had on retainer to help her with probiotics and to combat the sickness. When Ms. Lively went to fill out the privacy forms, she saw the expert was not what Mr. Baldoni had represented her to be, but was instead a weight loss specialist. Ms. Lively felt once again that Mr. Baldoni was shaming her for her body and weight. Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath failed to implement COVID protocols when there was a COVID outbreak on set. Ms. Lively was told by another producer that because Wayfarer did not have insurance coverage for COVID, Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath deliberately withheld from Ms. Lively that she had been exposed to COVID. Both Ms. Lively and her infant child contracted COVID from the outbreak. The complaint also mentions Wayfarer not giving an employee handbook, not having proper channels for Blake to report to HR or telling her how to do that. On May 26, 2023, Ms. Lively told a representative of Sony that she wanted to file an HR complaint about Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath's misconduct. The Sony representative told Ms. Lively that Sony, as the distributor of the film, was not empowered to control Mr. Baldoni or Mr. Heath's behavior on set, and that such concerns must be raised with Wayfarer, the studio responsible for the production. Wayfarer, Mr. Baldoni, and Mr. Heath received or were aware of a number of HR grievances regarding their conduct. For example, on the first day of filming, while attempting to hug Ms. Lively's employee, Mr. Heath said, "I don't even know if we're allowed to do this. It's day 1 and we have an HR report already." Additionally, early in the production, another actress made a complaint about Mr. Baldoni's comments on her appearance. Mr. Baldoni expressly acknowledged her concerns in writing, stating he would adjust accordingly. Yet on June 8, 2023, that actress informed Ms. Lively that outside of anything in a scene, I actually cannot talk to Justin at all, end quote. Mr. Baldoni later expressed suspicion regarding Ms. Lively's friendship with this actress, as if they were colluding against him. As described above, Ms. Lively and others attempted to raise concerns to Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath regarding certain of the conduct described above during filming, but they were not addressed given the futility of asking Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath to address their own behavior. After unsuccessfully attempting to raise concerns with Sony, Ms. Lively expressly told Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath that there were serious HR problems on set. Mr. Heath responded that they knew, implying that someone had mentioned to them that Ms. Lively raised concerns. In response, Mr. Heath told Ms. Lively that he thought she had wanted to see the nude video of his wife. So the complaint is about Wayfarer not doing anything about these guys, essentially, is what I'm getting from this. And yeah, all of that happened prior to going on strike and the all-hands meeting, it looks like, because then it talks about the all-hands meeting after that. It says neither Mr. Baldoni or Mr. Heath denied the veracity of Ms. Lively's examples. And then after that it says production concluded. And we start talking about the marketing, which we'll talk about next. I needed to get some sleep. I was up reading that complaint until 3 a.m., but I have rested, I have processed, I'm ready to finish. The complaint moves into something we already discussed, how Baldoni moved from the agreed-upon marketing plan into his hard pivot, which made Blake look terrible. I will remind you again, a lot of the shit that she got was for not taking this movie appropriately seriously, but as pointed out in the lawsuit, neither was Justin at first, because that was what they agreed upon. You can feel however you feel about that agreed-upon marketing plan where they were not supposed to bring up domestic violence unless they were asked to, but Blake was just doing the job that she was contractually obligated to do. And seemingly, up until Justin realized he had something to cover himself for, he was also following the marketing plan as written. He, too, was giving little tours of a pop-up flower shop, dressing in florals, until his pivot. And I've already made this point in my first video about this back in August, but for what Colleen Hoover books are, and what even a good version of this adaptation ever could have been expected to be, that original marketing plan made sense. I'm sorry. This was never going to be a big serious domestic violence movie. This is a movie based on a book with a pretty floral cover that gets stalked in romance even though it shouldn't. The marketing was extremely in line with how Colleen Hoover shit is marketed. I just think it's disingenuous to pretend that this movie was originally going to have some big somber domestic violence advocacy campaign attached to it that Blake failed to live up to. And I think it's disingenuous to pretend that either Blake or Justin did a particularly good job marketing this movie, not considering all the evidence we now have that this was, in fact, a PR blitz. Jojo, you are so in the way. And let's talk about how Justin marketed this movie. Because, okay, I understand people's discomfort with Blake Lively's alcohol tie-in branding stuff. You do not have to like any of that. You don't have to have any support for Blake Lively as an actress, as a person, or anything, to just take off the rose-tinted glasses that Justin Baldoni's publicists affixed to you about what he was doing during this rollout. A lot of you already saw this. Which I expected you to, because a lot of you found me from when I spoke about Alexa Nicholas. And Justin Baldoni is an Alexa Nicholas. He is. Don't boo me for saying something controversial but true. Man Enough is Eat Predators. The whole male feminist thing is the survivor advocacy grift. It's all the same shit. People just take Justin more seriously because he is a man and because he is less outwardly emotional about the fact that he's doing this. I think if Justin Baldoni had very much interest in protecting women and not just his own image, he probably wouldn't have run his set like that. He probably wouldn't have gone shopping for a PR firm that would create a hate campaign against a female celebrity the way that anybody who knew literally anything about what happened in 2021 should have when they looked at PR firms. And then, assuming maybe he somehow missed that they were the ones who orchestrated the Amber Heard hate train, which would mean that he is genuinely, just not on any kind of level to be presenting himself as a feminist anyway, so again, another point against Justin Baldoni here. Even if he somehow missed that they were capable of doing that, he probably wouldn't have gone shopping so that he could have another specific female celebrity that he could ask the people he probably hired to give her the Amber Heard special to also throw in a little Hailey Bieber for flavor. This man hides behind survivorship and a mask of advocacy, but the only thing he is advocating for is for his own ass to be covered. That's it. It is so clear to me. I want to get into a bit of what the complaint lays out about this pivot, because I really liked that they used the term survivor content, just because, they eat predators of it all. In advance of the release of the film, nearly all cast members chose to appear in public separately from Mr. Baldoni, given his on-set behavior. Mr. Baldoni became concerned that the public would discover that, quote, something is much bigger under the surface, end quote, on information and belief, alluding to the complaints lodged by Ms. Lively and others. At that point, Mr. Baldoni pivoted away from the film's marketing plan to explain his absence from the rest of the cast. He shifted his focus away from a message of female triumph to instead capitalize on female trauma. After the film's premiere, Mr. Baldoni changed his Instagram profile, canceled lighthearted social media posts, and instructed his team to look for survivors' reactions and support, all in an effort to quickly shift his own public narrative to focus solely on survivors and domestic violence organizations. By repositioning Mr. Baldoni's marketing of the film on information and belief, Mr. Baldoni hoped to create the false impression that he had chosen not to appear alongside other cast members. Mr. Baldoni directed his team to share on his public Instagram feed the private messages he had received from survivors sharing their stories of domestic violence with him. Mr. Baldoni's team talked him out of this idea, writing that they, quote, do not recommend using private DMs as content, end quote. And he continues to be weird about birth, I guess, because it says Mr. Baldoni went so far as proposing to share a video of a woman's birth moment, but his team talked him out of it, warning that it might, quote, be perceived as weird, end quote, and, quote, too intimate, end quote. Still, Mr. Baldoni's team was more than willing to deploy survivors' stories, reactions, and images to protect Mr. Baldoni's image. Okay, so remember, I didn't go over the plan that the PR firm made, the just in case we need to take Blake Lively down plan. That's because I wanted to wait and talk about it in a little more context. So, here's that context. As early as May 2024, Mr. Baldoni told his team that they needed a plan to get ahead of the claims against him in the event they were to go public. Specifically, Mr. Baldoni wrote, "Just want you guys to have a plan. Plans make me feel more at ease." On May 17, 2024, Mr. Baldoni texted his publicist, Jennifer Abel, that Ms. Lively's husband had blocked him on social media, stating, "We should have a plan for if she does the same when movie comes out." So this whole thing was orchestrated and put into action, and Blake didn't say anything publicly about Justin. This was all In case things came out later, let's go ahead and bury and destroy her now. Just in case. Just if things come out. In June 2024, a month after Mr. Baldoni's first promotional event for the film, Ms. Lively and others in the cast fulfilled their first publicity obligation for the film without Mr. Baldoni. They did not publicly discuss the misconduct that had occurred on set, nor did they ever suggest to Wayfarer or Mr. Baldoni that they intended to discuss their concerns publicly. Yet, on June 20th, 2024, Ms. Abel texted Mr. Heath her concern. "We can't have fans starting to guess why JB is left out of this stuff." Likewise, Mr. Baldoni strategized with his publicist, Miss Abel, about various ways in which they might cover up or explain away his on-set misconduct. On June 24th, 2024, for example, Mr. Baldoni proposed an offensive move showing neurodivergence and some of the attributes that come with it to explain that anything he had been accused of was social awkwardness and impulsive speech. And then there's also a footnote here. Consistent with his plan, Mr. Baldoni has recently been making the press rounds discussing his ADHD. And then links to him talking about his ADHD. And here's his text. "Hey guys, one thing I think I want to do is the Dr. Amen show. Matt, I know you have your feelings about it, but his practice saved my friend Miranda's life a few months ago. With everything going on, I want to have an offensive move showing my neurodivergence and some of the attributes that come with it so I can start talking about it. Most anything that I have been, quote, accused of, end quote, is social awkwardness and impulsive speech, and I think me sitting down with him and just looking at my brain and talking about some of these things will be helpful for me." There is a little bit more from the complaint to read, but this is the part where I am going to slide over into that New York Times write-up a bit more, because it has really laid out kind of the groundswell of this campaign against Blake. So the article goes over the complaint mostly in the beginning, but we have clearly gone over the new protections that Blake insisted on, which she insisted on before she had a producer credit. She got her producer credit, you may remember, when she made a cut because people took that and said that it was a whole dispute about creative control. She wasn't a producer at the time that she was trying to insist on these workplace protections. The article says, by the spring, Ms. Lively told people she worked with that the men's behavior had improved with the new protections, but she was now in a creative battle with them. With the support of Sony, the film's distributor, she made her own cut of the movie, bringing in editors and a composer and adding one of Ms. Swift's songs. In the end, Sony and Wayfarer went with Ms. Lively's cut, and she got a producer credit. As the film release neared, Ms. Lively and other cast members informed Sony and Wayfarer that they would not do any appearances alongside Mr. Baldoni. So did Ms. Hoover, the author, who had her own dissatisfactions with him, and had become more upset after he told her about Ms. Lively's allegations, according to text messages from Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath. So I also want you to keep that in your head if somebody tells you that Blake turned everybody against Justin and they're just going with her because she turned them against him and she's making the sequel. Looks like Baldoni was the one who told Hoover and not Lively. It does complicate some narratives, right? By the first week of August, Wayfarer and Mr. Baldoni had retained Miss Nathan, who worked with high-profile clients, including Mr. Depp, whose ex-wife, Amber Heard, accused him of physical abuse. Mr. Depp successfully sued Ms. Heard for defamation, and the trial became a spectacle amid suspicions of an online campaign to damage her credibility. This year, after a decade at the New York consultancy Hilsick Strategies, Ms. Nathan started her own firm, Tag PR. Its majority stakeholder is a company run by the entertainment industry executive Scooter Braun. Yeah, that guy. The reason Taylor Swift has to re-record all of her albums. I mean, there are other reasons why she felt like she had to do that, but like he's the one who bought them that she then had to do that about. In an initial planning document sent to Wayfarer and Mr. Baldoni on August 2nd, Ms. Nathan suggested media talking points, including that Ms. Lively used an imbalance of power to take creative control on the film. This is one that I heard in the comment section of my first video. People were saying that I shouldn't ignore the power imbalance because she's so much more famous than him. To which I say, look at what he was able to do, even though she was so much more famous than him. I'm not pretending, I will not pretend, and I have never pretended that Blake Lively is an easy person to defend. But she also was not categorically hated in this way until he put a significant amount of money and energy into making people hate her. And then this is that text message that was quoted earlier in the complaint, where Baldoni said he was not in love with the document that they sent. Ms. Abel relayed his frustration to Ms. Nathan. I think you guys need to be tough and show the strength of what you guys can do in these scenarios. He wants to feel like she can be buried. Of course. But when we send over documents, we can't send over the work we will or could do because that would get us in a lot of trouble, Ms. Nathan responded, adding, we can't write we will destroy her. Moments later, she said, imagine if a document saying all the things that he wants ends up in the wrong hands. We can bury anyone, she wrote. The August 6th premiere brought the first wave of press coverage questioning what had happened during the filming. A Hollywood Reporter story speculated about a rift between Ms. Lively and Mr. Baldoni after TikTokers noticed that the two stars didn't pose for photographs together, and that Ms. Lively and other cast members didn't follow Mr. Baldoni on Instagram. Ms. Nathan had already been speaking to other journalists, according to text messages. When Ms. Abel wrote to her August 4th that I'm having reckless thoughts of wanting to plant pieces this week of how horrible Blake is to work with just to get ahead of it, Ms. Nathan replied that she had already spoken off the record to an editor at the Daily Mail. She's ready when we are, Ms. Nathan wrote. A flurry of articles followed the Hollywood Reporter piece. Many made it seem as if the only rift was over creative control. Some journalists had gotten wind of Mr. Baldoni's behavior, but none of the most serious ones were published. He doesn't realize how lucky he is right now, Ms. Nathan texted Ms. Abel. And we do have those text messages because of the complaint. These messages are oh my god. Okay, so he doesn't realize how lucky he is right now. We need to press him on just how fucking lucky. The whispering in the ear, the sexual connotations like Jesus fucking Christ. Other members feeling uncomfortable watching it. There is just so much. In other exchanges, Ms. Nathan claimed that she had kept allegations against him out of stories, writing in one message that major news outlets were standing down on HR complaints. Meanwhile, an online backlash against Ms. Lively was underway. It is impossible to know how much of the negative publicity was seeded by Ms. Nathan, Mr. Wallace, and their team, and how much they noticed and amplified. On August 10th, Kirsty Flaw, a Norwegian entertainment reporter, uploaded to YouTube a 2016 interview in which Ms. Lively snapped back when Ms. Flaw commented on her baby bump and remained testy for the rest of the conversation. Ms. Flaw titled it, "The Blake Lively Interview That Made Me Want to Quit My Job," and told the Daily Mail that, quote, "It's time that people behaving badly in Hollywood, or anywhere else for that matter, gets called out for it." It wasn't the first time she had posted a video aligned with a client of Ms. Nathan. In 2022, in the midst of Mr. Depp's legal battle with Ms. Heard, Ms. Flaw posted clips of her interviews with the actor, tagged #Justice for Johnny Depp. I hate this interviewer. I have mentioned before in a video that I'm planning on looking into this interviewer's career because I also saw her pop up trying to use an old clip where she was, again, just being fucking bad at her job, but to make people hate Anne Hathaway, because for Les Mis, she was like, will you sing the answers to my questions? And Anne Hathaway was like, I will not be doing that, but you're more than welcome to sing, which I thought was funny, but Christy thought was a nice way to get a payday after she probably made fucking bank participating in this hate mob against Blake Lively. It is unclear exactly how Mr. Wallace operated. There are references in emails to social manipulation and proactive fan posting, and text messages cite efforts to boost and amplify online content that was favorable to Mr. Baldoni or critical of Ms. Lively. We are crushing it on Reddit, Mr. Wallace told Ms. Nathan, according to a text she sent Ms. Abel on August 9th. I do a little bit wonder if they infiltrated the Depp Delusion subreddit, or if they just did their job so well that people there started doing it, because I did notice that this was more of a mixed take there than I ever expected it to be. Ms. Nathan wrote to Ms. Abel, and socials are really, really ramping up. In his favor, she must be furious. It's actually sad, because it just shows you have people really want to hate on women. I literally cannot put into words how angry these women make me feel. This is, again, me using feminist theory language, but not only male-identified and identified with the patriarchy, but also just fucking gender traitors. I will say it. These are gender traitors. When a TikTok sleuth started asking questions about Mr. Baldoni, Miss Abel texted that this girl is on a very dangerous crusade. We've flagged to Jed and his team for more serious action on the social side, she wrote. Throughout the text exchanges, Mr. Baldoni encourages the PR team, sometimes flagging social media posts for them to use. On August 15th, he proposes flipping the narrative on a positive story about Ms. Lively and her husband by using their own words against them. Other times, he appeared to vacillate, seeking assurances about the tactics being deployed. When he notices a tabloid article critical of Ms. Lively, he sends a worried text. How can we say somehow that we are not doing any of this? It looks like we are trying to take her down. On another occasion, he wondered whether they were deploying fake bot accounts on social media. I can fully confirm we do not have bots, Ms. Nathan wrote, adding that any digital team would be too intelligent to utilize something so obvious. I genuinely don't think this is true. I literally would see the exact same wording in the exact same anti-Blake tweets, just in reply after reply after reply on Twitter. But also, they didn't need bots because, as they said, they can bury anyone. There is enough in Blake Lively's history that made people not want to support her. I'm angry that I am now making a video that is over an hour long where I am defending somebody who has worked with Woody Allen and got married on a plantation. All of that was already baked in so that everybody else would just pick up and run with this campaign once they got it started. By mid-August, the team was reveling in the damage to Ms. Lively's image. The narrative online is so freaking good, and the fans are still sticking up for Justin, and there literally has been no pickup of those 2 articles, which is actually shocking to me. But I see this as a total success, as does Justin. You did such amazing work. And then Nathan responds, the narrative is crazy good. So did you. The majority of socials are so pro-Justin, and I don't even agree with half of them, lol. Which I know I already read once in this video, but I'm reading again because I hate this woman. I hate this woman. How could you do this? How could you do this and sleep at night? And the thing is, I get it, it was an effective campaign because, as I just said, I don't like that I have to defend Blake. I don't like Blake as a person. I just also don't think anyone deserves this. It also confirms that the PR people intentionally tried to spin actual complaints about the HR stuff into the stuff that had already come out about Justin trying to lift up Blake and being so worried about his poor back, which, again, people spread and ran with, even here in my comment section. But I really had a feeling that there was more to it, especially when it was specifically words like chauvinistic that were being used to describe the onset attitude. Doesn't that make a lot of sense now that we've heard everything that we've heard today? A brand marketing consultant, Tara Keat, produced a report in August for Ms. Lively that concluded she had likely been the object of a targeted, multi-channel online attack, similar to the one against Ms. Heard, and that it was damaging her reputation. The report did not identify who was behind the attack, but by analyzing the entirety of Google's search index for Ms. Lively's name, it found that 35% of the results also included a reference to Mr. Baldoni. This was highly unusual, given the length of her career, the company said, and suggested that the media environment was being manipulated. A separate report by Ms. Lively's hair care company, Blake Brown, concluded that the social media onslaught also had a negative effect on that business. Her product line, which had launched in August with record-breaking sales, estimates that it lost as much as 78% in sales. And jumping over into the complaint here, I'm not going to read the part about her business because it's relevant, but I already told you enough. I don't need to read all those numbers and stuff. I am going to read this part about just how substantial this damage to her online footprint is. While there was considerable online coverage of the film and Ms. Lively leading up to the film's nationwide release in U.S. theaters on August 9, 2024, that coverage was mostly neutral. Some online discussions referenced an apparent feud between the cast members, but they included a smaller percentage of negative and positive mentions. Soon, however, Ms. Lively and her team became aware of an increase in negative media articles and social media coverage about her. The significant spike in the volume of negative sentiments towards Ms. Lively included notable spikes on approximately August 8th and 14th, 2024, and continued to trend mostly negative for the remainder of 2024. Indeed, as noted above, TAG itself noted a shift due to their efforts as early as August 10th, 2024. As of that date, the sentiment towards Ms. Lively turned toxic, with a sudden increase in negative comments, including hypersexual content and calls for Ms. Lively to go fuck herself. Nearly decade-old interviews of Ms. Lively were surfaced, commenting on her tone, her posture, her diction, her language. Ms. Lively was criticized for how she was marketing the film. She was repeatedly called a bully, a mean girl, and controlling, and was criticized for allegedly marginalizing Mr. Baldoni, among many other things. Articles, which members of the TAG and JonesWorks team working on behalf of Mr. Baldoni and Wayfarer credited themselves with influencing, dissected Ms. Lively and contemplated her cancellation. On information and belief, the Wayfarer team seeded social media content into publications with small audiences and lax editorial standards, and then fed those posts and/or articles to publications like Page Six, Newsweek, New York Post, TMZ, and BuzzFeed. These publications have larger audiences and greater reach, which significantly amplified the negative sentiment towards Ms. Lively. Content from low-influence sites was often linked or referenced in articles on these high-influence platforms. The social manipulation campaign engineered by Mr. Baldoni and Wayfarer helped create and sustain a negative news cycle and social media algorithm around Ms. Lively. The online narrative continues to trend more negatively as compared to other weeks and months prior to the social manipulation campaign, as reflected in the sentiment chart dating from the publicity event on June 13, 2024 through to the present. This was precisely the effect that the Baldoni Wayfarer team hoped to achieve. They manipulated the social conversation to discredit and bury Ms. Lively in retaliation for reporting her concerns about harassing and unsafe conduct during the production of the film, and in the hopes of deterring Ms. Lively from potentially taking those same concerns public. This campaign has been devastating to Ms. Lively, including by causing substantial harm to Ms. Lively, her family, as well as her businesses and all the people who work at each of them. Unlike Wayfarer and Mr. Baldoni, Ms. Lively has been precluded from not only experiencing the success of the film, but also from having the ability to engage further with her businesses, fans, and social media followers without immediately triggering an onslaught of hateful comments. Instead, Ms. Lively and her family have been forced to contend with a wide-reaching negative social media campaign. When it became clear that this media blitz was the result of an intentionally seeded, cultivated, and financed campaign against her, Ms. Lively began to experience mental, physical, professional, and financial harms that continue to this day. So it gives more examples of pain and suffering to her, her children, her businesses. These are but a few examples of the substantial harm caused by this malicious campaign, which pervaded and continues to pervade all aspects of Ms. Lively's life. Ms. Lively never sought out conflict with Wayfarer, Mr. Baldoni, or Mr. Heath, but instead consistently attempted to speak up for a safe and respectful workplace privately in the hopes of protecting herself, as well as the cast and crew, without jeopardizing a film that she believed could make a difference in people's lives. In response, Mr. Baldoni, Mr. Heath, and those working for them sought to destroy Ms. Lively and anyone else who knew the truth. Ms. Lively's discovery of the full extent of the retaliatory campaign launched by the Wayfarer parties has left her with no choice. Through this complaint, Ms. Lively seeks to set the record straight, to hold the Wayfarer parties and associates accountable, and to shine a light on this new form of retaliation so that it will not be used against any others who seek to stand up and speak out against sexual harassment. Okay, so that's the complaints. I'm not really seeing it looks like they both suck. That is a sentiment that I'm sure we will be seeing a lot. It's a sentiment people are already expressing. I'm not seeing both sides to this. I am seeing somebody who spoke out against a sexually harassive and inappropriate workplace again and again until she threatened to walk and managed to make these situations safer, and then who was punished by a very retaliatory media campaign. The worst thing about these women, about Ms. Nathan and Ms. Abel, is that they are goddamn good at their jobs, and they tricked a lot of people into going along with this. I know a lot of the people in the Nuance Corner saw through it, but I also know from reading some comments on my posts about this, I know a lot of people did not immediately see through this. And it's not only that they didn't see through it just because of a bias to already dislike Blake, it's also because of something that Nathan and Abel brag about. All press is so overwhelming. We've confused people. So much mixed messaging. It's actually really funny if you think about it. I don't think it's really funny, actually. I think it's fucked up, but I think it's true. I think the more complicated something seems to sound, the easier it is for people to say, well, we don't really know. But I mean, we knew. We knew, scrolling our Twitter feed this summer, that there was something disproportionate going on. We knew. Maybe we convinced ourselves it was proportionate. Maybe we convinced ourselves we would have fun at the witch hunt. Maybe we convinced ourselves that even if we weren't participating, we just didn't need to care about it. But, this happened in public. This happened right out in front. We all saw that interview was really old, and that it was, as somebody pointed out in my community tab post, the way Blake responded to an unsolicited comment about her body, probably around the time of that interview itself even, might have once been celebrated as a clapback girl boss feminism moment. I don't know. Again, there's just a lot of things that I would criticize Blake Lively for before I would even think to mention that she said congratulations on your little bump to another gender traitor in this mix of women who hate women, WHW. She said that to this woman because this woman was speculating on her pregnancy. That's when I knew that all of this was overblown. It's not too late to see it now, but I feel a bit of a frustration because it's like, yeah, I mean, we all had access to the same timestamp on that video. We all saw that something was being dug up 10 years later when it was really advantageous to her male co-star for bad things about her to be dug up. It's why I really try to shy away from nitpicks, and instead my criticisms of women like Alexa Nikolas or Swoop are the way that, actually, you know what? Both of them jumped on this hate train. Though I haven't seen any acknowledgement from Alexa Nikolas that she hopped on this manufactured hate campaign against Blake Lively this summer over a song on the soundtrack, which she did. Even though it's okay for her to listen to Drake Bell's music, it was not okay for there to be a Rye song in It Ends With Us. But we'll see if this campaign being outed is enough to lure Alexa out of hibernation to come back to her grift. I felt like this was easy to see. It was disappointing to me as this was happening how many people were acting like this wasn't easy to see. And the other thing that I hate is the way people are going to report on this, because they are going to censor themselves for the algorithm and or because they don't want to make people so uncomfortable they click off. So they'll say things like unsafe vibes and just not give you much more to work on about what the allegations that Blake actually had that Justin were trying to silence were. And I feel like I have done that in this video. So while I have so much more to say about this, I think I'm gonna call this here. I think we went over the complaints. I think you know where I stand. I think you know that there's room over here if you want to come stand with me. But part of that is I plant a flag. I plant a flag when I see a Darvo campaign happening, and I saw a Darvo campaign happening, and I planted a flag back in August. I am positive that this Darvo campaign is not over, especially because if this actually does go into a lawsuit, God fucking knows. I'm also positive that the majority of the people who jumped onto the Blake Lively hate train are not going to admit that they can both dislike her as a person and also think that this was completely unjustified. They're going to have to act like she asked for every rock they threw at her. And for me, I'm just glad I decided to sit and wait and see what I actually want to throw rocks about. Because what I want to throw rocks about is the kind of shit that Justin Baldoni does. What I want to throw rocks about is the kind of shit that Alexa Nikolas does, that Swoop does, that all of the people who are furthering these campaigns, whether unwillingly because they are just not thinking critically about what is being presented to them, or willingly for their own benefit, are doing. I want to throw my fucking rocks at that, and not at a woman who was not warm and effusive in an interview 10 years ago to a Johnny Depp fan. I don't want to brag, but I do think that my audience is uniquely equipped to have been an amazing group of people for me to already have to have this conversation with. I'm really glad I planted that flag back in August when I did, and I will continue to plant flags about stuff like this in the future as I see it. We will do a Baldoni deep dive. I will do a version of this video that has like a shorter thing, but it's December 22nd. I have a video I really want to finish making that comes out on the 24th, but I also really, really want to put this video out because I need to hear what you all think of all of this. But my take is, like, of course Blake Lively wanted Ryan Reynolds there. I would also want emotional support. Of course Blake Lively did not cry about how important and valid and powerful survivors are in every interview for a movie where she got sexually harassed on the set of. And of course, the Johnny Depp PR team did this. Of course they did that. That was not an unfair assumption for me to make when I was making it based on what they were doing and then on the confirmation that it was them, and not on the confirmation it was them and not on what they were doing. Like, I don't fully pull my stuff out of nowhere. I kind of know what I'm talking about sometimes. But I will continue to talk about this. I'm going to look further into Justin Baldoni in the new year. I'm going to try to finish my December 24th video for 9 p.m. that day, but I'm not entirely certain if I will finish it because I spent my weekend on this instead. But I'm really grateful for all of you being here to bounce off of this with me. I'm really, really grateful for the people who expressed that, like, I am somebody who they were hoping would follow up on this when they saw the headlines. That's really cool. Thank you so much for watching. Thanks for thinking critically about this kind of thing. Genuinely, thank you to the people who have already come back and told me, like, hey, actually, my mind has changed with new information. I think that's really cool. That is what I want to strive to do here. I'm gonna finish editing this and upload it, but again, not the end of what I have to say here. Also, just one more thing before I wrap up. The difference in, like, quality of reporting between this New York Times write-up and that Vulture article that we just read earlier this week for the Brian Jordan Alvarez allegations is astonishing. This is maybe one of my favorite pieces of reporting about sexual assault allegations that I have read all year. And I only say all year because I would say this is probably the first year that I have read, like, specifically a ton of those. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much to my lovely Patreon subscribers, a few of whose names you can see on the screen right now. Patreon is an awesome way to help support me financially if you're interested in a couple of extra videos from me a month. If you're interested in just like a one-off tip or donation, I also have a coffee, which is a huge help. Thank you so much to everybody who has supported me through the Patreon, through the coffee, by watching my videos all the way through to the end, by coming back and talking to me about stuff. You all are amazing. I love making videos for you. I'll be back with another one very soon. I love you. Bye.